Live. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today again for another live stream Q&A session. This time we're joined by the Bancor team, specifically Nate Hindman, who is the head of growth, and Asaf Shachaf, who is the head of product. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today.
Thanks, Rory.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. It's our pleasure. So what I'll do now is just briefly go over the agenda, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So again, I want to thank the Bancor, Chainlink, and blockchain community for joining us today. The real goal of this Q&A is really to allow the community to really better understand everything that's going on, why this integration makes sense for both teams, and really explore what Bancor has built and Bancor is building. The agenda will be about 30 to 40 minutes of kind of a Q&A structure, and then the last 10 minutes, we've been able to take some community questions. Really appreciate it for everybody that submitted those, and we'll go over 4 or 5 of those top community questions that were asked as well. So really to get things started, Nate and Asaf, if you wouldn't mind maybe briefly introducing yourself and then really explaining what Bancor is.
Sure. So I can start off. My name is Nate Hindman. I head up growth at Bancor. Been with the project since early 2018 and involved in crypto since I think early 2017 is when I really fell down the rabbit hole. And yeah, I'm based in Tel Aviv and super excited to dig in. Asaf, do you want to give an intro?
Yes, my name is Asaf Shachaf. I've been in the project since 2017, head of product and GM of the protocol team. And we're really gearing up to exciting future ahead of us alongside with Chainlink team on our wing here. Nate, do you want to share some detail about Bancor and what we do?
Yeah, sure. So Bancor is a decentralized liquidity protocol. It's made up of kind of primitive that's been in the industry that Bancor invented in mid 2017 called automated market makers. And these are sort of decentralized market makers that anyone holding a token can stake liquidity to and generate a fee off of trading volume. So Bancor is essentially a sort of DEX where any user can easily act as a market maker and generate a portion of the exchange's trade volume and trading fees. And so that's kind of the high level of Bancor, and happy to kind of dive in on any further stuff you want to cover.
Perfect. Yeah, well, yeah, thank you for that. I think the only kind of question I have is just, as you mentioned before, you guys essentially invented, I think, this concept, which a lot of people are aware has definitely grown massively in this space. Why was that model chosen versus, a standard order book, maybe DEX that people are familiar with?
Yeah, sure. I think in the early days, Bancor was very focused on, I guess, kind of the shortcomings of the order book based model. And that's whereas they were not really suited for the sort of smart contract future that I think a lot of us envision, that's based fully on chain, one that's fully sort of transparent to users, and also one that allows tokens in their earliest phases to access liquidity. The order book based model, since it really relies on trade volume, it's not accessible for new and earlier smaller tokens that want to access liquidity immediately. And just on the transparency and the smart contract side, basing sort of exchange on an algorithm, on effectively code, instead of order books, which are based on sort of human mediated forces, really allows you to, make them way more composable in terms of a primitive that allows that anyone can sort of access this liquidity. And it also, makes it sort of resilient to manipulation and more transparent, that everyone can see the sort of amount of liquidity and the amount of sort of slippage they might suffer on a trade when it's really dictated by on-chain code, the sort of the trading, as opposed to an order book that's kind of more hidden and less accessible for traders.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's a great explanation. And I think we've definitely seen composability, I think especially over the last year, really take off. And I think we're going to continue to see that, grow over time.
Sure.
Perfect. So kind of, Nate, for our next question, Bancor V2, I know a lot of people are excited about it. I know, a few kind of announcements and a little bit of news has been trickling out, but would really love to take a moment to kind of explore that, maybe some of the changes and added features that you're looking to add in the near future.
Yeah, so I mentioned this primitive automated market makers and enabling that to really allow anyone to contribute liquidity. So from when that was kind of launched by us in 2017 up until 2020, we've just seen a massive spike in usage. The amount of volume that is being processed by this type of new primitive is really spiked. A lot of projects are utilizing automated market makers in their solutions. And really, this is starting to become sort of an exchange solution that is actually really challenging the order book based model. With that said, there are some really key issues that have become increasingly apparent in the industry in the past years too. And it's left a lot of individual, retail, and institutional players who want to participate as market makers on the sidelines because it's too much risk. They're having, and I can just kind of dive into what those risks are. One of the key risks that we saw was impermanent loss. And that's where, in most staking solutions, when you stake, you can be sure that you'll at least get your principal back. You're hoping to generate interest off it on top of that, but you'll at least be able to take your principal back. And what we found with automated market maker staking and liquidity provision is that there could be an instance if, and quite often there usually is, when there's movements in the token prices on the external markets, it creates an arbitrage scenario that's extracting value from the automated market maker, where the liquidity providers to that market maker are losing. And when they pull out their stake, it could be worth less than if they had just held it in a wallet if they had just held the token on its own. So this is sort of a key obstacle that we felt that we needed to really solve in a new version. So this is one of impermanent loss and this risk that you could really lose. And I just want to add that the reason that this risk, I guess, hasn't been as public up until now is really because the automated market makers can be quite lucrative in terms of fees that they generate. But the impermanent loss that's being caused is always cutting into your fees, right? And so your fees are always going to be worth less in the current model. And sometimes, and actually quite often, you can end up with less of your stake when you take it out. So impermanent loss, the first. The second is that we found that when users wanted to contribute to AMMs or automated market makers, they had to contribute to another reserve asset when they were providing liquidity. And that's because in their current form, all automated market makers are made up of multiple token reserves that are used to fulfill these trades. And in order to provide liquidity, you have to split up your position into all these different reserve assets. So users who say I hold Link and want to provide Link to the Link pool, I have to split my Link holding into a separate reserve asset, right? So I can't stay long on the token 100% while I'm providing liquidity. And that was another major issue, is this multi-token exposure in AMMs. And the third major issue is we saw that the capital efficiency to AMMs was kind of an issue, meaning that the slippage, if there wasn't a large amount of liquidity in the reserves, the slippage can be pretty high for traders. And usually it's just cheaper for them to trade on an order book based or a centralized exchange, because in the sort of early phases of the AMM, if it doesn't have a large amount of liquidity, then they can, the rates that they're being offered, that the AMM can offer, just not competitive. So these were these kind of three issues that we felt that in order to push AMMs into the future and have them be a real usable solution by the mainstream players in crypto and beyond, we needed to solve these three issues. And that's what we set out to do in V2. And Asaf, I don't know if you want to supplement any of that or if that kind of answered your question before we sort of dive into how we solve those solutions specifically with V2.
No, I think you covered it very nicely, and really these are the main pain points that we've identified, and we decided to redesign the solution in order to address these issues. Something that was not designed in the first version of AMMs that we've designed in Bancor initially.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. And I know, Nate, you talked about maybe wanting to get into it in a little bit more detail. Were we kind of ready maybe to go through that? Take some people maybe through a presentation and really deep dive into how this thing works.
Yeah, sure. So I'm happy to, I shared those slides with you before. If you want to share your screen, we can kind of really dig into how the pool reacts to market conditions. So what you're seeing here is the standard sort of first version AMM, automated market maker. And this is the type of primitive you'll see in Bancor, and then also in really any project out there that's doing AMMs, from Uniswap to Balancer to Curve. This is your sort of a first version AMM. And when the pool, right here, it's set with 10 sort of token. We're using that as a generic token. You can think of it as ETH, but let's call it 10 TKN on the left side is staked on sort of one side of the pool that has a value of $1,000. And then on the other side of the pool, you'll have BNT with the same value. So, and it's set with a 50% weighting. So those two sides equal each other, right? And this is kind of the standard model. And so Rory, if you want to just proceed with the slides, you'll see that what I'm walking you through here is how these AMMs rebalance when a trade is made. And this is because we know the token amounts in the pool and it's dictated, the pricing is dictated by an algorithm. We know for a fact that if someone trades, let's say 100 of TKN, they would get back out of the pool 90.9 BNT. Right. And so a trader comes in and drops that on one side. We now have 11 TKN and 909 BNT on the right side. They're withdrawing, right, because they made a conversion. So now the pool is in a state of imbalance. And in order to bring that pool back to balance, we require an external market participant, someone else, an arbitrager that's hooked into our pricing network, to take a trade in the opposite direction. So Rory, if you want to move to step 3, right here we can see that an arbitrager, they had that opportunity for $9.10. They've closed it. And so they put BNT on one side, withdrew TKN from the other, and now this pool is in a state of balance. And again, what I mean by balance is that the pool price, the price that's being offered by the pool, matches the external market price, the market price. And so now that pool matches the external market price. And as you can see, there was no value lost. The liquidity providers didn't lose anything. The pool is still worth the same amount. And the arbitragers have closed this opportunity. So now let's move to the next slide, and we can see what happens in this V1 version when there's an external market price change, right? So on TKN, you can see the current price is 100, BNT current price is 100. We have those pools set up with the same amounts. There's no arbitrage opportunity because it's balanced. Now let's move to the next step. And what we're seeing here is on the external markets, TKN's price has gone up 20%, right? And so because of that, the pool, the left side of the pool, the TKN side, is now worth more, right? So it's above this sort of initial state, and the pool is now imbalanced. And once again, we see that there's an arbitrage opportunity to close this balance and rebalance the prices. So let's move to step 3. So an arbitrager has come in, they've closed the arbitrage opportunity, they've extracted that profit, and that profit actually is removed from the value of the pool. The pool is now worth less. It suffered an impermanent loss of $9.10, and the liquidity providers are now in a loss of $9.10. Now, why is this not permanent loss? Why do we call it impermanent loss? Well, if the ratios of the tokens were to somehow shift back to their original state, in terms of the pricing of the token, then there wouldn't be that loss. And if a liquidity provider, once the tokens had returned to this initial ratio, if they extracted and pulled their money out at that point, they would be even. They wouldn't have suffered a loss. But way, too often and way more often, what happens, and it's quite, unlikely that these tokens will return and stay at this, same exact ratio that they were established with when the pool was started. And at that same time, the liquidity provider can pull out their funds then. It's just very unlikely that's going to happen. So usually impermanent loss remains permanent. And so we can go to the next slide. So this you'll see is impermanent loss in action. Right here, what this graph is showing typically the performance of an individual AMM on Uniswap that had Link in one side and ETH in the other side. And the red line is showing the fees that it collected. Against pools collect a conversion fee with each trade. It's showing the profits, and then it's showing the impermanent loss. And this is kind of the issue that a lot of the community has come to us, because what you're seeing here is that Link has really mooned over this time period, right? Up 715%. But then at the same time, if I had held that Link inside the Link ETH AMM pool, which at a certain point in time was a fairly popular pool, I would be down 52.67% relative to if I just held Link on its own. And you show this to most Link holders and they will say, nah, I do not want to participate in a type of pool where this can be the outcome. So this was a really kind of big problem. And now let's go to the next slide. Okay, so Bancor V2 enters. And what I want to go through here is I want to go through those same flows, the trading flow, the market price changing flow, and show you how Bancor V2 pools react. And again, this is a new type of pool that we've launched in the system. V1 pools will continue to exist for as long as Ethereum exists and will continue to run just the same way. But this is really a new type of pool that we feel is resilient to this impermanent loss risk. So if we can go to the next slide. So for a trade that occurs against a V2 pool, there's really the same exact thing will happen. We still leave an incentive and an opportunity for an arbitrager to come in and rebalance prices. And again, this has no effect on the overall value of the pool, and liquidity providers do not suffer impermanent loss as a result of this. So trades against V2 pools will be the same as sort of V1 pools. But now if we go to the next slide, let's see what happens when there's a market price change. So again, we're starting the same way. The pool is balanced. The token price is 100. There's no ARB opportunity. Pool value is at 2,000. Let's go to the next step. And so again, we're seeing the token price has risen 20% on the external markets. So the pool is imbalanced. And so normally there would be an ARB opportunity here, right? Like we discussed before. But if you'll go to the third slide, the third step, there is no opportunity. What the Bancor V2 AMM pools do is they will go out and constantly check the Chainlink oracles. And when there is a adjustment, when an external price has changed, that will be communicated back to the Bancor pool, and we'll use something called dynamic weights. So before you can see that the pools were fixed, all first version pools have been fixed at 50-50 weighting. You could change the weights and then keep them fixed up until now. For instance, you could do an 80-20 pool. But what Bancor has really introduced is something called dynamic weighting that can respond to market prices. And what you see we've done in this example is when a token price rises, it will see its weighting in the pool respond. And the side in which the token price has risen and it's more valuable, it will increase its weighting. The opposite side, the other side of the pool, will decrease its weighting. And it will create an arbitrage opportunity that really is motivating arbitragers in that case to return the pool to its balanced state. The arbitrage opportunity really won't even exist in the case of an ETH market price. The weights will automatically change, and there will be no impermanent loss on that type of arbitrage. And that's really the really key innovation, is to turn Bancor AMMs and pools into dynamic sort of entities that can adjust and change their weighting, change their fees to respond to market forces. So that really covers the impermanent loss section of V2. I think if you want to just change to the next slide, by the sort of new V2 version then introduces these kind of key things into the pool. And that is your staked balance. So that's your principal that, is in the pool. And then there's the current balance. So when market forces shift the value of a reserve and how that's changing from the current balance. So these two kind of key values. I just want to go to the next slide to reiterate that the way Bancor AMMs are reacting with dynamic parameters, including the dynamic weights and dynamic fees, is to really always return the pool on both sides to the staked balance. So when current is ever below or above the staked balance, the incentives are changing in the pool to provide an incentive to return the pool back to its staked balance. So, I don't want to dig into, actually, why don't we just continue on through a couple more slides? This is just one more important sort of key feature. So if you think of the sort of innovations I mentioned before, the mitigation of impermanent loss is sort of one key feature. The second, as allowing a user to maintain their long position and only be exposed to one token in the AMM as opposed to its reserve assets. What this has really unlocked for us is something called liquidity amplification. And that is allowing us to essentially gain leverage on the staked liquidity to make it act like something like there's 20x liquidity or even more in the reserves. And what you can do when there's more, when the pool is acting as though there's more liquidity, is you can dramatically bring down slippage. We've seen this sort of solution already in the market, but it has been limited to stable coins and wrapped asset pairs. And the reason is because these solutions have had to limit liquidity amplification to pools in which there's no divergence really in the values of the reserves. If there is in the current model, if there were divergence and you were using a volatile asset, one of the reserves can be completely withdrawn. So the current kind of liquidity amplification solution is just limited to stable coins and wrapped asset pairs. What Bancor has really done is we've enabled liquidity amplification to be expanded also to volatile assets. Because we use Chainlink oracles and our current dynamic weights and dynamic fees to keep the two reserves at a constant sort of ratio whenever changes are happening, and because this pool is always staying balanced, we can actually bring this concept of liquidity amplification to volatile tokens. And right here in the graph, what we're showing is the amount of slippage that is being offered based pretty much on the transaction. So on the sort of right and left sides, as you get closer to either side, this is representing sort of if you make a particularly large transaction against the pool on either side, how much slippage you're going to get. And if you can see from the standard AMM, as you start to get away from zero, as the transaction size starts to get larger, the slippage really spikes. But with an amplified AMM and the liquidity amplification we're using, it really stays much lower. So, in a transaction where you might be looking at something like crazy 10% or 12% slippage, or with a Bancor amplified AMM, you'd be getting closer to 1%. Something with even like a 2% slippage, you would be getting closer to 0.2%. So we're really able to just reduce slippage by a lot. And this will actually generate way more volume on the pools, which in turn will generate way more fees. Because the way kind of DEX liquidity works now is that these aggregators really just they pick up the trade based on which pool is offering the lowest slippage, the best price. And so this will ensure that Bancor pools are getting way more transaction volume. And just, I think this last slide also, if you just want to, this is really just showing that we can provide this new amplification to volatile assets. So we're very excited to offer this new liquidity amplification features. And so those are really the three kind of key components of V2. I know I went on for quite some time, so feel free to, if there's any questions or anything.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think the interesting aspect here, I know especially for the Chainlink community. So it sounds like basically for this system to essentially work, you have to have this sort of external price feed that kind of feeds information in that allows these pools to rebalance. Is that correct?
Correct. And yeah, with that, we do need that. We need tokens, requires a token currently at the initial stage with a Chainlink Oracle. And, we're working on solutions that, could allow smaller tokens with, not as resilient or no oracles to participate in utilize this V2 pool. But currently it's limited to tokens that do have an external market to Bancor with, somewhat sufficient liquidity.
Got it. Okay, perfect. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for that detailed presentation. I'm sure people will find that interesting. I know a lot of people have utilized AMMs or understand, I think, at a very high, kind of a high level, okay, this is what they do. But I think there's not as much discussion. I know there was a blog post that was released on the Chainlink blog that I know kind of deep dived into this a little bit as well. We'll put that link in there if you really want to get into kind of how all this sort of works on the back end. But I think you're bringing up a point where, people didn't always discuss impertinent loss. I've seen it starting to be discussed a lot more recently. I don't know if that's because, you've discussed it or because maybe as a group or as AMMs in general have just started to notice, okay, hey, this is the next thing that, probably needs to be tackled or addressed.
Well, I think it's a testament to the solution. They have solved so many issues for exchanges, for token holders, and they can be extremely lucrative instruments for if utilized properly, and for extremely advanced traders. But there are these sort of key issues that are holding them back from. There's a reason why there's not a Binance based on liquidity pools yet, or a NASDAQ based on liquidity pools. And this is kind of the future that we see, and these are the issues that need to be tackled and solved in order to sort of lay the groundwork for AMMs to be a way more serious solution in crypto and beyond.
Awesome. Perfect. So I guess then, Asaf, this one's kind of a little bit for you. Ultimately, how does this benefit the user? At the end of the day, how does the user, in your opinion, ultimately benefit from this?
So I hate to reiterate what Nate already said, but this is really where everything hits the mark. By eliminating impermanent loss, we benefit the users by locking the value within the pool. So as a liquidity provider, you benefit from this, like using an AMM system that is using Chainlink oracles to dynamically adjust, allows value to be stored within the pool and benefit the liquidity providers that are part of this ecosystem. So it's going back to the same point again and again.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, I definitely think it's worth reiterating for sure. I guess kind of moving on from that, I know, Asaf, you've been working, with the team obviously behind, Chainlink to sort of provide this solution. Just wondering, how has that worked out? What has that relationship been like?
So I have to admit that the team, the Chainlink team, has been super professional so far. Every encounter that we've had with anyone from the team has been super cooperative. We got answers for any type of questions we've had. Well documented solutions, and overall very like a responsive team. Even in the cases where we needed or we had like requests or adjustments or things that we had in mind that might benefit the ecosystem, the team was very acceptive and immediately drew a design plan and checked how this can be implemented in the best optimal way to benefit more Chainlink users. So overall, I think it's a project that's really backed by a great team behind it. So yeah.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, I know in my workings with obviously Nate, I spent a lot of time working with Nate kind of behind the scenes, but it's been a pleasure from our perspective as well. You guys are super responsive, and it was really cool to take this, to see this idea kind of start as sort of a open discussion, and then next thing you knew, seeing things actually being built with it in what I think is a very short amount of time from that initial discussion to all of a sudden it's like, oh wow, this thing's happening. It was pretty incredible to see.
Yeah, it was same experience for us. Same experience.
Perfect. So I guess kind of transitioning to this sort of the space as a whole, and Nate, Asaf, love to hear your opinions on this one. Obviously, this is dealing with impertinent loss, which is again, an issue that's kind of been plaguing AMMs. What do you think is that next big hurdle, or what do you think is that next thing that needs to be removed? This could be AMM related, or this could be kind of in the space to sort of for everybody really to take that next step, gain that new group of users, and make the experience even better for everybody participating.
Yeah. So, I mean, first, I think we need to take a moment and, think about so often in crypto, I think you kind of forget where you've sort of come from. So I think we need to take a moment and look back at the past few weeks, the past 3 months, the past 6 months, and realize that DeFi is now on everyone's mind, both in and outside of crypto. So we are approaching an inflection point, it seems, that what was sort of just a very nuanced rumbling in the crypto world is now a main focus of everyone. And there's a lot of development and usage sort of piling into this. So, let's take that first moment to, I guess, pat the community, pat everyone on the back that we have started to hit some pretty serious growth over the past in recent memory. Now, that said, I think the talk about sort of impermanent loss and what we saw with AMMs is kind of a similar trend that I think I see holding back the DeFi ecosystem in general sometimes too. And that's where things can get fairly complex, fairly easy. And with all this kind of composability, with all the amazing things you can do with these like money Legos, things often shift in the direction of complexity. So I think that the thing that needs to sort of change, and we saw this, by the way, also with AMMs, where they started, the dream, the promise was that they would start as, something you just put your liquidity in. If you're a token holder, you either can put it in your wallet or you can just put it in a liquidity pool, and it will, provide the token project with a utility because you're giving them liquidity, and you would also generate sort of APR off it. But then what was left out of that conversation is these kind of inherent risks in the model, the fact that you had to split your position, you could suffer impermanent loss. And all of a sudden we saw that the AMM solution became sort of a very like trader focused, very technical solution that in order to kind of manage these complex risks, it requires, all these sort of technical solutions that weren't accessible to your everyday token holder or crypto user. And we feel that V2 is kind of bringing it back to this sort of original token holder that's not some like algorithmic arbitrage trader who can still generate value from it. And I think this is a similar sort of lesson we need to learn in DeFi, that as we get urges to go into, really complex, amazing sort of financial things you can do, we need to always ground ourselves in, what would sort of mainstream user, what would be accessible and attractive for a mainstream user to do. And I think only then, when we can kind of continually shift ourselves in that direction and reducing those kind of complexities and making it totally sort of straightforward with, you know, I'm not even talking about your grandmother, but your friend who uses Robinhood, or, you know, E-Trade, their sort of levels, as opposed to the like crypto developer geek, then, you know, I love them. I am one of them, and I love messing around with all these things, but we need to sort of always focus on the next, you know, the next users of these technologies. And so that is, I think, kind of the main barrier to overcome.
All right, perfect. Asaf, would love to hear kind of your opinion. What do you think is that next step or thing that we need to do, maybe as a space to kind of move forward?
Yeah, so I think so far 2019 and leading into 2020 has been a year of bridge building and connectivity, and I think this is what we are seeing, and I think the future will be more resilient of this activity. And what do I mean by this? We've seen projects that connect different blockchains and bring assets from blockchain to blockchain. And also we see the value in projects like Chainlink, for this matter, that bring the fiat world into crypto and report it, so we can actually incorporate this on-chain into activity that we do on-chain. So this is the money Lego that I see emerging out of as a result of this, is really a situation where we have all these assets from all these different ecosystems kind of emerging together, and the problem or the difficulty that I foresee at this point is really the latency, resilient. How do you make this connectivity to be up to par with anything else? And I think Chainlink is leading the market in this aspect of connecting these values or transmitting this information from one place to another. But it's still a limited amount of oracles and a limited amount of tokens, and we need more and more of these solutions to come in order for DeFi and money Lego to really explode in that sense.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting as we, I think kind of Nate, as you touched on, as we take, 3 steps forward, I think, it's important to also reflect. I know, Asaf, you were, kind of reflecting as well on the previous year. And, I think making sure that we're making great choices, but ultimately saying, what is it going to take? What does the user ultimately need versus, things that are so complicated that, you need 3 hours to basically understand them to a normal person, which will mean that a normal person will probably never use them. So. Perfect. So getting on now, we had a couple community questions that we gathered before. So would love to run those by you, whichever person, wants to step up and answer those, I think would be fantastic. So I guess the first one really touches on, this appears to be pretty large from kind of changing the way things might operate in the future. So this one from a user: why do you think many people don't understand the significance of this relationship and the implications for enabling single asset exposure in AMMs?
Yeah, I think the answer is fairly simple, and it's just that we haven't seen anything like that before. The way we know AMMs is, okay, so I have to split my token position if I want to participate. I think it's, if you were to tell someone who grew up in a world with horse buggies that, one day you would have the car, I think introducing that concept to them at first would be difficult to understand too. So I think that's kind of the sort of the crux of it. And yeah, I think now once people all of a sudden realize that you can do this thing, that you don't need to split your token position, you don't need to hold another token just because you want to participate in the pool. From my perspective, I think we'll just see an explosion of new users. I don't see any reason why someone who holds a token wouldn't just consider putting that token to work in a way that benefits the project and also earns them money. So but it's definitely, a lot of these concepts that we're introducing is totally flipping the AMM on its head. And a lot of people, as we noticed, they take a second, scratch their head, and wow, this is just a brand new thing.
I just on top of this, really, like when Bancor launched the first AMM in 2017, it took almost a year for the ecosystem to acknowledge this and understand what it actually means. So these things, they take time sometimes. People need to understand and digest the technology, digest the idea behind it. And at this Bancor V2, we do foresee a more rapid adoption, given the fact that you can actually put your token into work and get it done in that way.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for that answer. Moving on to the next one. Will Bancor V2, using obviously Chainlink oracles, facilitate institutional liquidity provision to DEXes?
Yeah, well, I can just, at least from our observation, in hearing the appetite from institutions that want to, when we talk about institutions like, I guess you can think large whales, token holders, or funds, crypto funds, VCs, from word of mouth in the community. When you tell one of these players that, hey, you can provide your liquidity, but if one of the token moons, you're gonna be at a pretty heavy loss. This is just kind of a deal breaker for a lot of those players. They can't be exposed to that kind of risk, and as a result, just have not have really sat on the sidelines in hope that the technology would mature and that there would be a solution. So I think we're hearing in the communities is that now that there is this solution where they're not exposed to such large risk when being a liquidity provider, I think that does change the game for them, and time will tell. But this is our expectation.
Awesome. Maybe Asaf, would love to hear, what do you think are the core strengths of Bancor, and where do you see Bancor in 5 to 10 years?
So one of the major strengths of Bancor is the innovation part. We are the ones who design the AMM. We're also the ones to rethink the design and break it and rebuild it in a new format. We come from a place that we understand the pain of the users, and we keep trying to find a solution that fits this mark. The future of Bancor is to really facilitate decentralized activity on every single token is out there, using all the resources available and making sure that we have a decentralized solution that fits every token in the ecosystem. And by the way, this is also blockchain agnostic, to try and exist on any blockchain that exists out there as well.
Awesome. Perfect. Great answer. Love that one. Kind of the last one here. Is it correct to assume that this relationship between Chainlink and Bancor is focused on high volume tokens only? Also, is Bancor V2 intended to compete not with just DEXes? It seems like it's much higher functioning and can compete with centralized exchanges as well. So I guess to kind of unpack that, I guess, is this really focused on high volume tokens, or could this eventually be used, or can it be used for tokens with lower, I guess, volume / liquidity?
So, as mentioned, that are in the early stages of V2 and this model, tokens will need if they want to participate, a Chainlink oracle, right? And so that's the sort of initial constraint we see. As mentioned, we're already working on ways to make this accessible to tokens that may not have an oracle, a Chainlink oracle, or may have a Chainlink oracle that does not have as much sort of liquidity or volume behind it to make it as sort of resilient as we would have liked. So in the early phases, we really see this being more designed for the sort of mid and larger volume tokens. That said, V1 and kind of what was added into V1 as a part of an intermediary push that we did called V0.6, it still has a very innovative model for early stage tokens, where you can have any number of tokens in the reserve. You can have initial, like that constant liquidity from day one. The weights can be variable, so you can have a pool with 4 tokens, and each one has 25% weight. They can be different weights. So it's still an extremely flexible and effective solution for smaller tokens. So once we have this wave of liquidity and volume and coming to the network from these mid and large size tokens, this will create a more healthy and a better liquidity protocol that will also benefit any newer early stage token that wants to tap in and utilize a Bancor pool. Because all of a sudden you'll have these very liquid on and off ramps with these mid and large size tokens, right? Now, to answer the question, does it compete? I would say it competes with order book based exchanges. The vast majority of centralized and I'd say a large portion of decentralized exchanges are based on this order book based model, which I would say AMMs are just a different model and potentially competitive with that. I think more of the conversations that we're having with centralized exchanges now are, they're seeing the power of DeFi, and they want to offer DeFi services to their users. So way more centralized exchanges are coming to us and saying, we see liquidity provision in AM pools as a new type of asset, a new type of DeFi asset that we could integrate into our centralized exchange. And just like sort of, you've seen Coinbase do with compound lending, and and Binance has a whole staking service, we see AMMs being available within these sort of centralized, exchanges where, everyday users can all of a sudden, oh, I just bought this token. Now I can put it in an AMM in this DeFi protocol. And so that we think is very sort of complementary and symbiotic with these centralized exchanges.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, thank you for that. I think that was another great answer as well. It's really been a pleasure having both of you gentlemen on today. As we wrap things up, I just want to say thank you again, Nate and Asaf, for joining us. I know a lot of work behind the scenes went into this to put this together. Thank you for, again, sharing the presentation as well, Nate, and kind of taking everybody through that. I guess really quickly, if people want to explore more or want to kind of deep dive more into really how all this works, any places, any resources, any upcoming updates, that maybe you can point them to?
Sure, yeah. So we've just started publicly talking about the solution. We started yesterday in a community call, and now we're speaking with you. Over the coming days, we'll be publishing supporting documentation, our technical docs, sort of research articles and white papers, and also we'll be open sourcing the code fairly soon. We'll have it live with a bug bounty, so everyone will be able to look at the code, try to break it, and then we're aiming for mainnet release in July. And so you'll be able to use it. But currently, sort of the best place to go for more information on this model, some of the issues we've referenced in Bancor in general, is our blog.bancor.network, our Telegram channel, t.me/Bancor. We're always available to answer questions and have interesting conversations about AMMs. And so those are the best kind of places to do that.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Sure. We're super excited. Launch is scheduled for this month. The audits are coming in good. They're getting wrapped up now. And so, we're really excited to share this with the Link community, the Chainlink community, and really just get it out there and see it in action, because there's only one way to truly know, how powerful it is, and that's to have it in the wild, right?
Absolutely. Very cool. Well, I know everybody's very excited about that. Again, thank you to the community for joining us today. If you had any questions that didn't get answered, as Nate just mentioned, a lot of channels on the Bancor side. You can also hop in any of the Chainlink channels. We'll put all those links in the description below. Again, thank you for everybody for joining us. Always love doing these. Make sure to subscribe to get any alerts and updates on these in the upcoming future. And really excited to follow what the Bancor team is doing. And hopefully in a few months down the road, after this thing's launched, we can hop on again and maybe take a look at how well it's worked and maybe what the next stages could look like.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. We'd love to do that.
Awesome.
Thanks so much, bro. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you, Nate. Thank you, Asaf. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.